Now on 4, Sir David Steele presents the first of 2 programmes celebrating 20 years of Britain's longest-running satire show, 2 decades of weekending.
If it were ever to go, I think it would be a great tragedy from the point of view of the number of producers, writers and so on that it manages to train. It's the BBC's training vehicle. They'd have to run it, even if they never broadcast it.
There's another, isn't there? There's a third party involved.
Look, it's for our own good. We'll never make anything of our lives if we don't part now.
You don't love me anymore.
It's not that I don't love you or you don't love me. It's that nobody loves us.
Some weeks you listen to it and you think, oh no, this is a real dud week. And then suddenly, out of the blue, there will be the perfect joke, the right joke.
And now, the Home Secretary, Mr. Whitelaw.
Oh, thank you. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
You are thrown into the deep end, but it's the one deep end where everybody jumps in together and gradually help each other to swim out to the lucrative shallows of ITV.
Quite simply and categorically, the fact of the matter is this. In Britain, a crime is committed every... has anybody seen my watch?
The problem with writing topical material is that there's no repeats in it. So it is financially suicidal, because I've got these wonderful Gladstone one-liners that just nobody wants.
Oh, yes, do it to me again, David. Oh!
The longest-running comedy sketch show in Britain, Weekending, was first broadcast on Radio 4 at 11:05 p.m. on Saturday, April the 4th, 1970. That week, the homeless had marched on Buckingham Palace, the Israelis and Syrians were at war, and the last British soldier had left Libya. Events such as these, forgotten now yet headline news then, earned passing references in the very first Weekending, a 25-minute look back at the week's news presented by Nationwide frontman Michael Barrett.
Hello, my name's Michael Barrett, and I'd like you to look back with me at the Weekending Saturday, April the 4th. Later in the show, Basil Boothroyd will be telling you about next week's news. But right now, let's look back at some of the things that have happened in the last 7 days. For instance, on Sunday, John Lennon and Yoko Ono announced that they're having a baby for peace. For peace? That's the last thing they'll get. Yes, kind of embarrassing memories, really, because I'm not quite sure why I was picked to take on the show. I suspect it was that it would be a surprise to have a current affairs presenter on what was supposed to be a funny show. I just found the whole thing slightly embarrassing because I'm not a comic, and I wasn't quite sure whether I was supposed to do it deadpan and straight or whether I was supposed to try to turn myself into a comic.
It was a kind of rather uneasy programme, I think. We presented it as a sort of cod news programme, and we had this theory that a good script would survive performance, you see. So we got some rather dour performances of some, not always the funniest material, presented by a rather lost news presenter.
That was Simon Brett, the writer of After Henry and one of the original co-producers of Weekending. He didn't have to produce the first series for long, though. On May the 18th, Harold Wilson called a general election and Weekending was immediately taken off the air. Ironically so, for the politicians had little to fear from a programme concerned not so much with being hard-hitting as being funny about the week's news. The cliché was that satire was dead and the producers as well as the public were not yet ready to exhume the corpse, and the result was a topical hodgepodge that was neither very satirical nor a hit with the critics. Gillian Reynolds.
Radio 4's Saturday night excursions into topical humour, Weekending, are a sad disappointment. Seldom can a new series have started off so badly and got so steadily worse. The jokes swim like dumplings in the thin grey stew of the humour, and no amount of brisk dishing up by Michael Barrett can disguise its basic lack of comic nutritional value. Well, that was me writing in The Guardian in May 1970. And I feel a bit ashamed. I mean, when you think this programme happened at a time when people were thinking, oh, there's nothing much to make fun of anymore. And all I was trying to say was, I quite fancy a joke and a laugh, but this isn't it, folks.
This is Smoothie Town News, and the country is still in the grips of a national postal strike, with Handlebars Jackson persuading the postman to continue the strike and summoning his union conveners to planet. Yes, Venus to planet. The Russian spacecraft Venus 7 lands on the planet Venus, the first landing from Earth on a planet, though the craft never came back no more. No more? That's right, and a big surprise there for the England football team for their game with Malta. This time, Bobby Moore will be staying back home to see the play. Home, that's the play.
I remember having a review, I think it was in the Observer, where the reviewer said he thought this was probably the worst programme he'd ever heard, and it should never be heard of again. And I wrote to him, I remember, and said, I think that's really unkind after one programme. I do ask you to listen to it again. So the next week he wrote, he said, I've listened to it again, and it's even worse than I thought. I write to him every year, pointing out that we're still on the air.
Co-producer David Hatch. Whatever difficulties Hatch and Brett faced in bringing a topical comedy show to the airwaves, matters weren't helped by their decision to employ only one writer, Pete Spence, who later wrote To the Manor Born. The sheer physical labour of writing 25 minutes material in 3 days meant that quality had to give way to quantity, and the writer they chose had only just left university.
Well, great pressure, because if you can imagine, well, two things. One, the actual workload that one had. Secondly, I was very young at the time. I mean, I was straight out of university and suddenly found myself catapulted into this job. Normally, one's first writing job is some kind of contributory thing, but suddenly my very first job virtually was having to fill this whole span of radio time.
Just look at those mini skirts and maxi hats. And what about the shorts? Do you like shorts? Well, that's very kind. I don't mind if I do. Thanks. Well, bottoms up and cheerio.
By the second series in January 1971, a settled cast had evolved, featuring Nigel Rees, who stayed for 5 years, David Jason, who stayed for 12, and Bill Wallace, who never left. After 3 years, weekending was established enough to run throughout the year, and the writing burden was now shared out between two writers. It was still far from being the open house and forum for new writers that it is today. It took the appointment as producer of Griff Rhys-Jones, later star of Not the 9 O'Clock News and Alas, Smith and Jones, to turn weekending into a team show.
You come in with a sheaf of ideas, some of which you need important stories on. And then as you're sitting around the table, you keep noticing that Mr. Sourbutt's in the corner, who writes extremely badly but comes along to every meeting, is going, yes, I'd like to write that one, thank you. And you have to go, yes, thank you, yes. Anybody else want to take this very important idea and story, which we seem to have an interest in this? And everybody sits there and looks at the table for a long time. And you finally find yourself handing out to the man you know is not going to provide you with anything that you're going to be able to use in the programme. All these smashing ideas.
One of his successors as producer was another writer-performer, Who Dares Wins, and Chelmsford 123 star Jimmy Mulville, who continued the open meetings.
There was one guy who used to bring in a sketch, an Archer's parody every week. And when I consistently didn't put this sketch on, he said to me at the end of a long, hard series, "Why do you hate me? You obviously hate me. You never put my work on." So you've got to be quite tactful in these kind of situations. And I said, well, it's because, it doesn't quite fit. It's a bit sort of surreal. It's, you had to find the right, you couldn't just say, look, this is utter crap.
For everyone who contributes to weekending, from novice to seasoned hack, the routine is the same. On the Tuesday, read the papers and think up ideas. Wednesday, go to the meeting and try and grab the stories you want, and if not those, then the stories you don't want. On Wednesday night, although it usually runs well into Thursday, you attempt to turn those now flimsy-looking ideas into fully fledged sketches and take them along to the producer, whose non-committal responses convince you that he hates it, or maybe that he loves it. On Friday night, you listen to the show, wondering why the producer put in all those half-baked sketches instead of yours, until suddenly you hear familiar words and feel blessed relief.
My lords and members of the House of Commons, my government consider as their highest priority the maintenance of national security and the preservation of peace. My government will contribute to arms control and disarmament negotiations. My government will work for a more flexible and competitive economy, which will sustain rising living standards.
A programme that runs 44 weeks a year can only find so many amusing and original ways of saying Mrs. Thatcher is domineering or Neil Kinnock is a windbag, or, to maintain the balance, that Paddy Ashdown is leader of the Liberal Democrats. The easy way out, and often the funniest, is to use a format. Sadly, producers have now realised that Star Trek is not always a suitable metaphor for political stories, although the occasional one still slips through the net.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of an extremely dubious enterprise. Its 5 minutes mission to boldly send an unmanned spacecraft 600 feet in the air, then explode in a shower of wasted money. Jim?
Ah, Bones.
No, it's just the way I'm standing. What's happening, Jim?
I'm afraid launch has been delayed.
Jim, you can't mean it, and I missed breakfast as well.
Actor David Tate and writer Guy Jenkin remember some 10-year-old formats.
There have been some classic sketches which have been passed from writer to writer over the years, like there were two men in a pub. One was rather smart, a bit of a barrack room lawyer, and the other used to come in all the time with under, and he would be the one who actually had the wise remarks at the end. And they used to end up always by saying, it makes you think, doesn't it? Well, this is it, isn't it? That was David Jason used to do that with Bill Wallace.
Well, this is it, isn't it?
Oh, no, Belt, I doubt it.
I mean, it's bloody silly, isn't it, eh? What? Thinking about banning the drink ads on the telly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what harm does a pint or 7 do you?
Well, no, I mean, it just kills your brain cells, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose it's the idea of a view of the news from the man in the pub, but who nevertheless had a shrewd idea of the news that sort of undercut the public commentators. I mean, I suppose in the same way as The Father and Son was a great format for economic stories, because they involve an awful lot of explaining before you can get onto anything. And so by having the child asking questions.
Daddy, what's congratulate mean, Daddy?
Congratulate, son, well, that means to say, well done to somebody. Who's congratulating who?
The imp is congratulating Mr. Healy.
The imp? No, that's the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They're congratulating Mr. Healy because he's used their money to bring about an economic recovery.
What economic recovery?
The father there was Bill Wallace, now in his 20th year with the programme.
It's good to take some political issues and treat them very indirectly. Get it into some other sort of room, not an office, not a cabinet room, not the Houses of Parliament. One of our favourite venues, of course, was the lavatories of the Houses of Parliament. Not to make scatological jokes, but just so that you had an echo and you had toilets flushing and things. And, of course, a lot of business is carried out in those sort of environments.
Willie, where are you? It's Jim Pryor.
Over here, Jim, by the hot air blower.
Oh, listening to your speeches again?
Oh, leave it out, Jim.
Sorry, Willie, we've been looking for you for days.
Well, I dashed in here as soon as I heard the first result.
Well, don't worry, Willie, it's good news.
You mean we lost?
No, we won.
Oh, no. That means they'll give my job to... Hello, Norman.
Talk of the Tebbit.
Hello, gentlemen. So, it's a landslide, then?
No, I just sat down a bit heavily.
In 20 years, Weekending has had 27 producers, 65 commissioned writers and hundreds of non-commissioned ones. The personnel has changed, but the programme hasn't. And that continuity has come through the cast. Although some 50 actors have been guests on the programme, including Martin Jarvis, Jonathan Pryce, Andrew Sachs and Tim Brooke-Taylor, the acting core has remained solid. As well as Bill Wallace, David Tate is now in his 15th year with the show and Sally Grace her 7th. David Jason stayed 12 years, and Nigel Rees, Sheila Stiefel and John Glover for 5 years each. In all this time, the procedure has hardly changed. The cast arrive every Friday morning at 9:30 with the scripts and running orders already complete. After one read-through, a sketch is recorded and it's on to the next. By lunchtime, everything is finished. Actor David Jason has fond memories of the routine.
It was exciting and unpredictable as well, because you knew that you were going to do some material that was appertaining to the week, but you had no idea what it was going to contain. So as actors, one looked forward to it very much, because it was a very exciting part of the week. Certainly was for me.
During Weekending's first 7 years, there was no woman in the cast. Simon Brett, producer for 4 of those years, attempts to explain why.
I think it was partly our experience because our background was mostly university review. One of the great rules of university review, certainly in those days, was that you always had to end up writing something for the ladies, if you see what I mean, that there wasn't enough material for the women in the cast.
What they'd been missing was Sheila Stiefel.
They'd been playing their own women, as it were. I mean, they'd all been having a go at women. I can't remember why, except it must have been some wonderful chauvinistic reason. There was a thing in those days of not having women about.
All like to take your places.
Yes.
We'll go around the table clockwise. Wait till the music starts, and when it stops, last one left standing's a backbencher.
Yes, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Music? Come on, who's Arts Minister?
Yes, that's me.
Right.
Ready?
Prime Minister, the Franks report is here for you to read before it's published.
Good. We must be careful to edit out any references that might be of use to any potential enemy of Her Majesty's government.
Like the Argentinians, for example.
I was thinking more of the British electorate.
Oh.
Now let's...
Well, they can't go on strike without holding a ballot. Too many people think they can ignore democracy whenever it suits them.
Well, they've already had a ballot and they voted for a strike.
That's neither here nor there.
Those were Weekending's 3 Mrs. Thatchers. Sheila Stiefel, who left in 1982, Tracy Ullman, who then did the show for a year, and Sally Grace, who took over in 1983 and has remained the radio voice of Mrs. Thatcher ever since.
When they first did Mrs. Thatcher, when she was Minister for Education, wasn't she? David Tate used to do her voice in just an extremely high register.
We didn't know much about her except when you heard recordings of the House of Commons. Whenever she stood up to speak, it was in a very high voice, and they always go, woo, 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 woo. Of course, we always do Atmos, House of Commons Atmos, which is indeterminate noises that they seem to make in the House of Commons, which has appalled and surprised a lot of people, I think. But we do all that before the sketch starts, always, just to create, and then, order!
Order! Questions to the Prime Minister. John Blundy.
I would like to ask the Prime Minister if she deplores the projected rise in unemployment to 2 million.
I'm certainly not going to answer questions from a member of the government who doubled unemployment in 5 years.
Peter Worth.
Is the Prime Minister intending to take action now the inflation rate has reached...
I'm not going to answer a question from the party who left us with a 12% inflation rate.
But I'm a Liberal.
Well, I don't know how you had the gall to ask the question, considering your party passed the Great Reform Bill of 1832.
End of questions to the Prime Minister.
And I'm certainly not being told to sit down by some little jerk with a wig sitting in a big chair.
Well, to say this, I've got rather fond of her over the years. I shall miss her if and when she goes. I've never met her. No, so if you're listening, Mrs. T, cucumber sandwiches at number 10 for 10 minutes would be lovely.
Well, Weekending's cast are able to turn in consistently good performances with little rehearsal because they are actors before they're impressionists. Often where a voice is hardly known, the actors will invent an approximation which fits the character. Alternatively, as David Tate admits, they just copy each other.
I think a lot of impressionists just impersonate each other impersonating, which is... It's clever, but it's not... I don't think that's how it should be. You should find your own way of interpreting a character. Willie Whitelaw, I remember doing it as Margaret Rutherford. There's an enormous amount of fun.
Hello, William Whitelaw here.
Hold it a moment, sir, while we put on the balaclavas.
Well, I just called in to congratulate you, chaps. I think between us we did an excellent job.
Yes, thank you.
Of course, I've been in charge for all 8 days.
6 days.
6 days, yes. Tricky fellows, these Iraqis.
Iranians.
Yes, Iranians. Now, if you just let me stand in the middle while these chaps take the photos, and perhaps you'd let me keep this empty lager can as a souvenir.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And maybe you'd autograph it, anonymously, of course.
Yes, I think it's an easy way out, but on the other hand, I think sometimes the impersonation gets in the way of a well-written sketch. What we've always tried to do, I hope, is to act the sketches well, and this sometimes has meant that the voices that we do are more an impression, if you like, as opposed to an impersonation. Yes, so I do the David Steele now, and it's a sort of rather almost tearful approach we've done to it, with the nice Scottish accent that he has, perhaps accentuated.
Absolutely terrible. I asked fellow victim Roy Hattersley if he thought satire depended too much on caricature of personality.
I think political satire always depended on caricature of appearance to a degree. The great Punch cartoons about Gladstone and Disraeli often portrayed each one of those two great men in very unflattering physical light.
Yeah.
Disraeli with ringlets, which were not enormously popular in 19th century England. Gladstone as a crazy old man. Indeed, Punch cartoons of Gladstone made him out to be crazy more often than not. I think it's an unavoidable part of the genre.
Keep calm now, Neil, keep calm.
I can't help it, Roy. No good news on interest rates. No joy on houses, job training and investment in industry. Totally ignore the Tories. The Tories have created this medal for themselves, and now they're taking it out on the very people who voted for them. It's a bloody outrage.
Neil, pull yourself together. You know, the tears in your eyes.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Roy. I just can't keep my feelings under control any longer.
Oh, well, look, never mind.
It won't be long now. They've really done it this time.
You feel better now?
At Weekending, there is a strong working relationship between the producer and the writers. Writers John Langdon and Guy Jenkin both point to the advantage that radio has over television, that the producers take time to show writers the error of their ways.
Weekending, there is a producer who, very much like a teacher, in as much as the writers will often present their scripts and very unsensitively stand over the producer and wait for the comments. And if you have a producer who can keep his patience throughout a whole series, then they will be shown where their sketch has gone wrong. No other programme I know will take that time or trouble.
It's one of the few places that writers can start, and that producers sort of take time and tell you if you should keep your day job and not embark on a career. But certainly most television doesn't have time to do that, and Weekending did, and was very good for that, I think.
Hello and welcome to the Thatcher Factor. With me tonight I have one of the country's top economists who will be trying to sum up the feeling in Britain after 10 years of Margaret Thatcher. Professor.
There appears to be no reason why Weekending shouldn't carry on for another 20 years. As long as young and hungry writers keep coming through, it should continue in its accidental role as job centre for budding writers. And as long as public figures deserve to be ridiculed, it should carry on doing what it does best, poking fun at people in power. In our second programme, with this in mind, we will look at the political role of Weekending, its skirmishes with authority, its 4-year legal battle with Derek Jemison, the pressures it faced during the Falklands War, and we'll find out why it wasn't allowed on the air during an election campaign until 1987. For now, we'll leave the final word to Simon Brett.
I like it, yes, I have a sneaking affection for it. I mean, when we started it, 1970, we thought we were being slightly daring, and we never thought it would end up as a kind of alternative down your way.